thought that was a really good explanation of the story. So we're going to look a little bit at pride comes before a fall. I don't know about you, but I think we live in a world now where more and more people, more and more celebrities, sports stars, politicians, royalty, there's a self-inflatedness to them. They all think they're better than they are. And it's a little bit like this. The I word comes into things quite a lot. Look what I've achieved. Look how I'm going to make this country great again. Look at what I intend to do. How wonderful I am. And I was just sitting thinking through the other day of some of the, maybe just celebrities and sports stars in this country who we've seen put on a pedestal and, you know, almost be given all the gold, all the towers, everything they need. And they believe it, and then it all goes wrong. And I just want to think a little bit about that today. But I just want to start with a story. I think we can all have pride, can't we? Sometimes it's a little bit, sometimes well hidden. I was reminded of a story the other day by Andy. We were just chatting about something. And around this time of year, if you go to a carol service, especially in an Anglican church, it can be quite normal for people to go and light all the candles. The service will be usually at night, so it's quite dark. And the church we attended at the time, it was a tradition that 3 or 4 people would be chosen to be given the taper, you know, the long thin candle, to go and light the candles on the altar. And I'd always sat in the congregation and think, one day that they'll think I'm special enough to do that. And sure enough, one year came up and they said, Darren, we wondered if you'd like to light the candles. And my pride, you know, grew a foot. And it was like, of course I would be honoured to do the most important job in church this Sunday, you know, more important than the speaker or the music or even God. You know, I was inflated to the top of the pile. And they said, what will happen when this carol starts? You're going to come to the back of church and we will give you the taper, we'll light it, and then we'll turn off most of the lights. Please remember the word most, it's important. And sure enough, we got to the carol and I wandered back and got my candle and they lit it. And I was told I would walk to the front, I would light all the lights on the altar, the candles on the altar. I would turn around and my 2 assistants, I would light their candles, and then between us we'd light the whole church. And I think I was floating, you know, it was so important. And sure enough, I got to the back of the church, they lit my taper, and then turned out all the lights. And the only thing when you light a candle that's in front of your face, the only thing you can see is the candle. You can't see anything else, just that one light. And so I'm now thinking, I know the altar's there, but there's 3 steps somewhere, and I don't know where they are. And so I start walking pretty slowly, and you know where you put 1 foot forward to try and not stumble? And sure enough, I eventually felt the first step and tripped on it. And stumbled onto the second step. And by the time I kind of hit and styled it out onto the third step, most of the church were giggling under their breath. Thankfully, I couldn't see them. So I went forward, very embarrassed, and lit the candles on the altar. I thought it'll be fine, because in a minute I can light the candles of the 2 behind me, and then I can just run. And I turned around, they hadn't followed me, so I was there by myself. So I then had to go and find them and light the candle. And it was one of the most embarrassing moments in church I've ever had. But I wonder whether God was trying to teach me a lesson. You know, why was I so full of pride about a silly candle? And that God just kind of didn't really embarrass me, just made a bit of a joke of me. But I learned a lesson. And I wonder, this is obviously nowhere near what he goes on in this story, but I kind of think we all need to learn from it. We can't all be wonderful. We've got to do what God calls us to do, whether it's a small job, a big job, we have to follow him. So we see in this story, the story begins when the king is on the crest of a wave. He's got everything. We saw the pictures, yeah. We've all heard, maybe at school, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Imagine living at that time. You know, he's got these massive kind of palaces and gardens and everything he could possibly need. And everybody looks to him for being the leader of the greatest empire that anybody's ever known. It's not hard to think, well, eventually you're going to think you're that special. You know, we see people around the world now today who you really do think they think they're as special as they tell everybody, not necessarily as everybody tells them. But when you think that Babylon was surrounded by 15 miles of double walls, they were 85 feet tall and 27 feet thick. They could have chariot races on the top of the walls because they were that wide. You know, it's imagine like doing a Formula One race around Babylon. Visitors entered the city through the massive Ishtar Gate, travelled down the main boulevard towards the king's palace. He had everything he could possibly dream of. And then he starts using the I word. I am great. I did all of this. This is all mine. You all must do as I want you to do. And then someone's going to knock you down, aren't they? And so we see that he has two dreams in the story, but this is the second one. The first one dreams about how the nation will go, but this one talks to him about what's going to happen to him. And it is really quite weird. There were visions I saw while lying in my bed. I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong, and its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it, the beasts of every field found shelter. Birds of the air lived in my branches, its branches. From it, every creature was fed. In the visions I saw while lying in my bed, I looked, and there before me was a messenger, a holy one coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, cut down the tree and trim its branches, strip the leaves, scatter the fruit, let the animals flee from under it and the birds from the branches. But let the stump and its roots, bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground, in the grass of the field. Let him be drenched in the dew of heaven, and let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from man, and let him have the mind of an animal. Kind of think that would freak you out, wouldn't it? I mean, Sarah had dreams last night, but not as bad as that. You were just worried about learning French and that a celebrity was having an affair that she didn't know about. But pray for her, please, pray for her, and the rest of us. But no, you probably had one of them dreams where you wake up and go, I don't understand that. And here's what supposedly the greatest man, the greatest ruler in the world, has had a weird dream. But back in those days, people really felt dreams meant something. They were communication from God. They were telling you something. Because nobody understood it, or maybe they did and they were too scared to tell him, he went and got Daniel. He knew that Daniel had the Spirit of God in him and that he could interpret dreams. So Daniel probably stood there and listened and nodded like we all do when people tell you about dreams. And thought, I know exactly what this dream is. But imagine saying it to the king. You know, imagine going to a certain leader of America and telling him the truth. It would be quite scary. But Daniel does. Daniel says, comes from, you, O king, are the truth. The king's not going to want to hear that. He goes on to say that God has ordained that the king will become like a beast in the field. You will be driven away from people and will live with wild animals. You'll eat like grass like cattle, be drenched with the dew of heaven, and for 7 years you'll be passed by until you acknowledge that God, in fact, is sovereign over the kingdom of men, not you. And then almost immediately, God kind of gives him a bit of a moment to think about it. We don't know how long, but God gives him just that time to repent, time to turn around, time to go, okay, it's not all about me, and change his ways. But of course he doesn't. So we think about a year later, all of a sudden the king hasn't changed his ways, and exactly what David suggests happens. The fateful moment arrived. As the king was walking on the roof of the royal palaces of Babylon, he said, Is this not the great Babylon that I have built by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? And then all of a sudden, it all changes. The king is no longer the king we know. He loses his mind. He loses his wealth. He loses his position. He finds himself in the field, like a cow, like an animal, just being brought to nothing. He's put out to pasture. And for almost 7 years, nothing changes. He's just probably seen as always the madman. He's not the man we knew. He's not as special as we think, or thought he was. Something dramatically different has happened. And it made me think, I was driving into work this morning, and I was just thinking, does anybody remember David Icke? David Icke? Coventry goalkeeper? Yeah. Who one day got up and said, I believe I'm the Son of God, sent it back. And we all know he was going through probably a mental breakdown. He'd had people kind of gee him along into believing it. But for a long time he went on television, he'd go on chat shows, and he'd talk about the fact God had ordained him to be one of the sons of God and to be this prophet to now. But, you know, it was all hooey. He was a man who was struggling, and so the more he said things, the more people just laughed and thought, well, that's really sad because he was this important person. But actually, he was just a joke to many people. And I believe that that's probably what Nebuchadnezzar become, a joke. Something we laugh at. I was thinking the other day, I don't know if any of you saw Philip Schofield go onto the desert island a few weeks ago. And there's this man who was inflated to be something really important. You know, he was on television every day, every minute of the day. And we all thought he was a wonderful person. And I think he began to think it as well. And then obviously something happened, and he was cut down like a rose almost. He cut it off with a stem and fell. And the next minute he's on TV on a desert island eating anything he can eat and living in poverty. But is he doing it for himself, or was he doing it to learn a lesson? And if you watch the show, you kind of got the impression he was a bit of both. There wasn't necessarily a lot of humility there. The king had been put out to pasture. It was a fate worse than death almost, because everybody could still see him, and that pride was still there. But then slowly over time, we almost got to those 7 years, and it would be easy to think, oh, he's just been written off, forgotten, not important. But then 7 years later, something changes. The king's life took a dramatic turn. At the end of that time, Nebuchadnezzar raised his eyes to heaven, and his sanity was restored. I praised the Most High God. I honoured and glorified him who lives forever. So just as quickly as it all went wrong, he was restored in the eyes of God. Because he changed back. He realised that he wasn't the most important person in the world. He wasn't even the most important in his own conversation. He looked up, lifted his eyes to heaven. He woke up. His sanity was restored, and he spoke up. He praised the Most High and said, it's only because of God that all of this has happened. It's only because of God that I'm being restored. It's only because of God that anything is possible. And I think it teaches us that how easily do we kind of think we were the one that did it. You know, oh, that was me. The reason I've got this nice new car is because I've earned it. We all get told, don't we? We are worth it. We are important. Even down to shampoo. You know, get some now because you're worth it. Everybody's inflated. Most of you are still wearing crowns. I mean, that's so very quickly takes us off. We can all be very full of pride. And actually many things that we are proud about come from God, not from us. And we just need to make sure we've got our position right in the whole story. I think it's a warning to us all. It's a great story, but it's a warning to us all. I'm going to finish with another story I heard. I went to a conference once, and sometimes when you go somewhere, like again, you put people on a pedestal. And the two speakers who were speaking, I thought they were pretty good Christian speakers. I was looking forward to hearing them. And one of them stood up, and at the beginning of the story said, "It's look, I'm just a man. I'm nothing special." He said, "I've been treated very differently." I noticed when we went for tea before that he was going to speak, there were 2 rooms, and we're like, a lot of us were kind of shipped into this one room, but him and his entourage were shipped in, and I just peeped into his room, and it was like he was going to the banquet, and we were eating downstairs with the servants. The food was the same, but the way he was being treated was... And I think he'd noticed and was pointing out, actually, this is ridiculous. I want to come and eat with you. I'm just a human being. I'm just a man. I make mistakes. And he says, you know, you put us all on pedestals, Christian speakers, people who you think are important, but we're just human beings. It's not about us. And he told a story of another speaker. He said this lady was just about to go and do a preach somewhere. Everybody, you know, there's been posters up, and everybody was excited about her coming, about how she's going to be amazing, and it's going to be great. And she said, I started to believe it. She said, and on the way to the event, I thought, I can't turn up in a dirty car. They think I'm that great. I've got to get the car washed before I get to the event. So as she's driving to the event, dressed, ready to speak, all posh, she pulled into the car wash and get the car in the right position, pay, press the first button, and the car wash thing is coming towards her. It was at that point she realised she hadn't closed the window of the car. The driver's window was open. You can't at that point get out. She can't start the car, and the big things doing this are getting ever closer. And in the moment of madness, she's saying, what can I do? What on earth can I do to protect the car? The only thing that came to mind was to stick her bottom in the window, which creates the perfect seal. As the hot water and foam and suds and wax and everything else went through, and she had a very nice, bright, shiny top. She also had a very nice, bright, shiny bottom, and had to attend the meeting like that. That was the first thing she told everybody in her talk. She said, don't think you're more important than you are. God's in control of all this, not us. She said, and do you know why I know? And she just turned round, and she's got this very big, wet, shiny, foamy patch on her bum. We all make mistakes. We can't expect everything to be perfect, but we also shouldn't be so full of pride that we think it's all about us. Give God the glory he deserves, and he will help us out. Right, can we have another song, please?